Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Susanne Breinbeck, and I am a social anthropologist and associate professor at University College Copenhagen. And I'm going to be teaching the first of my sessions of this ITIRE training program. And this lesson is really on the entanglements of pedagogy and politics. I'm going to speak about the political context in Denmark and how it affects the work that pedagogues and teachers do when it comes to refugee education. This means that I'm going to say something about the Danish asylum system as the overall framework, and also about the integration law. And I start out with this image, as you can see, this image of a woman depicted as a tree, which is a painting that one of my research interlocutors painted. And she made this painting while she was seeking asylum and actually living in an asylum center. And as we can see, she's eyes closed, her neck stretches like a tree trunk into the icy soil. And above her, in her hair, we see this kind of clockwork where the figures are sort of out of joint. And it seems, at least when I look at it, get this impression that her inner reality is kind of out of sync with this bureaucratic time. But noteworthy too is that when I talked to her about this painting, she told me, kind of with an optimistic tone of voice, but that the red flag was her little hope that she would be granted asylum in Denmark. Okay, so I'm going to take my point of departure in a research project, a collective research project that I have carried out with colleagues at University College Copenhagen between 2016 and 2018. And here we looked at the encounter between refugee children, their families, and Danish daycare institutions. We carried out fieldwork in 4 Danish municipalities. And what we did was an ethnographic study, which consisted of both interviews and participant observation among refugee families, both some who had been granted asylum and some who were in the asylum-seeking phase, and their encounter with pedagogues and other welfare professionals. This project then later evolved into a new project, which I'm now finalizing, called Lives in Limbo. And this project focuses on what can be called a highly politicized childhood for refugee children in Denmark. The background to the second project was the so-called paradigm shift law, which was accepted in Parliament in 2019, whereby all residence permits in Denmark were to be temporary. So in this project, we look at the pedagogical and ethical dilemmas for parents and welfare professionals. So, and also for parents and children. So there is this kind of situation of a limbo, because on the one hand, parents may be preparing their children for a future in Denmark, going along with the integration law, ideas of learning Danish and settling here. And at the same time, they may in fact be preparing them for a life elsewhere, outside of Denmark. And this causes these kind of irresolvable dilemmas, really, and quandaries, also for pedagogues and teachers, because are they preparing children for a life in Denmark or for a future that may be going to take place elsewhere? And in this sense, may be caught between a sense of how do they care without feeling complicit in these kinds of political context. The image here is shows a group of children in the deportation center Sjælsmark. So these families have in numerous times had their asylum cases rejected and have been waiting, some of them for years on end, in Danish deportation centers. So it really shows this kind of highly politicized childhood, whereby children are taking part here in an event, a political manifestation, if you like, orchestrated by adults. The sign that the little boy holds here says, "We are waiting for you, Mette Frederiksen." Mette Frederiksen being the Danish Prime Minister. I'm going to move on now to just give a little bit of background to the overall context of refugees in Denmark. So overall, there are 70 million refugees in the world. And out of this, a really small number, you could say 11,000 applied for asylum in Denmark in 2019. 1,777 people were given asylum, and a larger number received residence permits through family reunification. But this, in the Danish context, following the so-called refugee crisis in 2015, where a large influx of refugees, mainly from Syria, but also other countries in the Middle East and Northern Africa, fled to Europe. The influx of refugees was relatively new to the Danish context. At least we can say that 51 municipalities in Denmark received refugee children in their daycare institutions for the first time. So this was at around the time that we started our project on this phenomena, because for many daycare institutions, this situation was new and challenging. Now, as I'm sure you are aware, we have a new situation with what's going on with the Russian attacks on the Ukraine, and a new influx of the refugees is happening as we speak. So this really reactualizes the relevance of this kind of course. So just really briefly, what happens upon arrival in Denmark? So first of all, when refugees arrive in Denmark, they are provided shelter in what is called Center Sandholm, a large refugee center in North Copenhagen. And this is where their asylum case is registered by the police and the case begins. From then, overall, you can say that it is divided into 3 phases, which are existentially extremely important to refugees who go through this. So first, we have the first phase where they're registered at Sandholm, and if asylum is granted, they will be provided housing in the municipality, and an integration program begins. I will say more about this later. However, if not, in case of rejection, they move on to phase 2. And during this phase, they have the right to have their case taken to the Refugee Council for a retrial. But this process can also often be very long and time consuming. And there's a lot of waiting entailed and a long period of uncertainty. And during this phase, quite often families will experience being moved around different centers and having actually to relocate within Denmark several times. Now, if their case is negative, they will then, after having been tried through the Refugee Council, they move on to what is called phase 3. And this means being sent to one of the deportation centers, such as the Center Sjælsmark that I showed you images of just before. And here they will receive a reduced welfare and are really in a situation where they are waiting to be deported. Families cannot work. There are a lot of restrictions on their everyday lives, and it really puts a serious psychological stress on families who stay in this phase for a long time. Now, for families who do get asylum, this is where the integration law then is put into effect. And I'm going to just quote from it here. As a refugee, you are bound by the integration law. This means you are obliged to learn the Danish language and to find employment. As part of your integration program, you will receive help to find a job. You may be offered an internship, salary subsidized employment, or a vocational course. And so at the same time, what happens in case there are children in these families? So it says here, do you have children in the 1 to 6 age group that need to attend daycare while you learn Danish and work? The municipality will find you a place at a daycare center in close proximity to your accommodation. You will be able to stay with your child at the daycare until your child is accustomed to the place and the staff. So this is the overall framework, and it sounds relatively straightforward, but in practice, it's full of dilemmas and an important period of transition. So returning to the highly politicized aspect of the situation for refugees in Denmark. And now the situation may be changing slightly because a new special law has been passed, which makes actually Ukrainian refugees exempt from some of these very harsh policies. And this is also the topic of intense political debate at the moment. But anyways, overall, since 2015, there has been a serious tightening of legislation when it comes to refugees in Denmark. Here we see the former Minister of Integration, Inger Støjberg, actually displaying a cake in which she was celebrating, kind of in the spirit of Danish birthday celebration, the 50th tightening of legislation around refugees. So just this image to just very briefly draw a picture of how politicized this field is and how harsh the policies have been. So among these tightenings has been, for instance, the very infamous jewelry law, through which refugees have been asked to hand over valuables that exceeded the amount of 10,000 kroner in order to pay for the cost of their lodgings. Another harsh measure has been, as I just mentioned briefly before, the paradigm shift law, which was passed in 2019. Because from then on, all residence permits were to be temporary. So in 2019, the Danish Parliament adopted the paradigm shift. From then on, all residence permits were to be temporary and non-renewable, except if directly at odds with Danish human rights commitments. In other words, refugees were to be sent home as soon as possible. However, the integration law still coexists with this deportation agenda. And this, among other things, creates substantial pedagogical dilemmas that we're going to talk about in more depth.